All right, so we are sitting down with Malia, and we are in, where are we?
Pasco, Washington.
Pasco, Washington. Okay. Your husband didn't want to chat with us, which is fine, but I've been told by a few people you have a good story to share, so, and I don't know any of it, so I'm excited to hear about it.
Yeah.
So let's start with, and we don't have to spend a lot of detail on this, but it gives us a little bit of a bearing of your childhood and stuff. So let's start with if you were born and raised or not, and then also we can go back to your parents because that does affect how you were raised if they were or weren't. And then just kind of go into a little bit of your childhood.
Okay. Yeah, I was born and raised going to meetings. We had meetings in our home my whole upbringing. My parents continued to have both Sunday and Wednesday meetings in their homes.
Is that in Washington State?
No, now in Arizona. It was in Washington State, my childhood, and now they live in Arizona.
Okay, but you grew up here?
Yes, I grew up in the Seattle area. Very well known in the professing community. My parents had like the annual brother workers meeting in their home. So I was very accustomed to having the workers around. It seemed like they were around quite frequently. I knew many of them.
Annual brother workers meeting. So was that just like I've heard of workers meetings before, but it was just brother workers?
Yeah, it was just brother workers. I don't remember numbers, probably between 12 and 15.
Okay. So just the state brother workers would get together and have some sort of meeting?
I believe so. I don't know if perhaps there were maybe some older brother workers from surrounding areas.
Sure. Okay.
But they would be in our basement for a couple of days around a big long table and discussing
issues at hand.
Meeting
I wonder
arrangements.
What they were talking about.
Yeah, I never was privy to that. But yeah, I'm curious too.
Yeah, now that we know what we know, there's probably some conversations in your house that were interesting.
I'm sure, yeah. And we had a lot of leadership in our home. You know, Sydney Holt, who is a previous overseer, Dean Brewer, Mark Huddle, all people I grew up knowing well.
You were a good little professing family.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yes, very good. And then when I was 10, almost 11, we moved to Arizona. It was a very, very small town. There was hardly any professing people there. So my parents, now they have both meetings, but for a while we traveled to Kingman, which was over an hour away, and we'd actually drive to California for union meeting, which was probably close to 2 hours from our house.
Wow. But that was a small price to pay. I mean, you still had to do it, right?
Yes, that was
what you
did.
Probably drove to any gospel meeting or special meeting within 2 hours of our house, probably.
Yeah. That was very normal for us, too. And even still, like right now, I believe my parents' field is joined with Las Vegas, Nevada.
Okay.
So sometimes, like, that's where gospel meetings are. Yeah, so it's definitely not abnormal to travel long distances, you know, in our childhood.
How was it different from growing up in Washington? I mean, you said you were, 10 or 11 or 12? And then when you got to Arizona, were there things that you noticed that were different? Or was it pretty similar?
As far as the friends go?
Yes, yeah.
And the culture? It was very similar in a lot of ways. It was so much smaller where we lived in Arizona that just there wasn't near as many friends around, near as many workers around. So that was a difference. But as far as the culture, it was pretty much the same.
Okay.
When I went into middle school, I started to really struggle with, I don't know, probably some normal teenage things, young adolescent issues. I was wanting to do things like wear pants to school and wear makeup, which of course I was not allowed to. So I was sneaking that. I was sneaking pants to school or sneaking makeup to school. I wanted to fit in, and that did not go over well when I got caught. I also tried to sneak to a school dance one time. That also did not go well. And so there was a lot going on at home just with my rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
And
that was in your early teens?
That would have been early, like from probably 12, 13-ish.
Okay.
My dad struggled with some mental health issues, and I did as well, pretty severe depression and anxiety. So things at home were really unstable, and I was getting in huge trouble for some of these things I was doing. And so when I was 13, my parents sent me to Oregon to live with my aunt and uncle. So I lived there for a year with my aunt and uncle. It just was not working at home. I mean, I had not known that there was any talk of me being sent away. I know my parents had kind of looked into like, I don't even remember the term, but like kind of military style camps where you send your kids to, so to kind of shape up their behavior.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what that's called too, but I can't.
Yeah, I can't recall right now. I went to live with my aunt and uncle in Oregon for a year, and that was also a really, really messy time. I was struggling.
They professed too.
They professed too.
Okay.
There was struggles in that home as well. At that point, I was really struggling with depression and anxiety. I was really struggling with even just my physical health and weight gain. And at that point, that's when I had started to dabble a little bit in drinking, smoking, doing drugs. I don't even have a good reason for why, except that I was pretty miserable.
Do you think it was part of the rules that you had to follow, but you didn't want to? Do you think that drives some of that? Like it was just so depressing and the anxiety that came with that?
Yeah, there is some of that, but I also think there's a huge part of it was just the dysfunction in my relationship with my parents.
Sure. And
just feeling really neglected and unwanted and unsupported. So I was kind of at a loss of how to function, and just, I wasn't upholding my parents' standards, and that just caused such turmoil at home.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what I meant as far as like not doing what you were expected to do. Obviously, and depending on how conservative your family is, how big of a deal that is too to them, right? So like, I grew up very conservative. So if I would have done something, I was talking to somebody the other day. I don't even think I wore t-shirts like as a kid. I wore like polo shirts or button-up shirts all the time. I mean, I probably had a couple t-shirts when I was younger, but then like in my teens and stuff, I mean, we dressed very conservatively and things. So like, I can understand if I had done something against a good professing child that my parents would have been really upset and caused a lot of issues. But I was pretty good for the most part.
Yeah. So I lived there for a year, and things had kind of spiraled when I lived there. And then I moved back home after the school year was over, and I, was living at home again, and things were okay for a little bit, but it didn't take long before just some of the same issues kept popping up, and I was
He's snoring down there.
Yes.
I don't know if you can hear that on the camera, but
I was not making my parents happy, and it just was very dysfunctional. One night in an argument with my dad, I was kicked out of the house.
So this was after you lived with your aunt and uncle for a while? You went back home?
I had gone back home when I was 14. I would have been 14, I believe. And at 15, one night I was kicked out on a whim. I found a young girl to live with. She had a studio apartment just in a really, really bad part of town. It was not a good situation at all. But
it didn't help your situation.
Yeah, it was somewhere to stay, a roof over my head, and I just stayed on the floor. I didn't have a car at that point, so I was trying to find rides to school. I was trying to find rides to work to support myself, and that was really, really difficult.
At 15.
At 15.
Yeah. I'm
and
sure.
So that had taken also a huge toll on my mental health, and just feeling severe depression and anxiety and, no self-worth. I was just struggling to survive. And so eventually I asked my parents if I could come move back home. And, they said yes. But I wasn't at home for very long before one day I had gotten a small tattoo on my back in the time that I had not been living at home. And my parents accidentally saw it and said, that was it. You are not welcome to live in our home. Mm-hmm. You're done here. So I packed up my stuff, pretty much just loaded my car up. My parents had let me use a car at that point.
Really quick, just so we can kind of see a little bit more of the story. Were you did you profess? What age did you profess?
I had professed when I was, I believe, 10 at Milltown Convention.
Okay.
So I had been professing when I was younger for a few years. And then the details are fuzzy, but I believe my dad had me stop taking part because I had been, like stinking pants and makeup to school, that kind of thing, and felt like I was not behaving as a professing person should. Okay. So then I stopped taking part.
Did you still go with your parents then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So then, and I'd gone in Oregon, but once I had been removed from my home, I, no longer went to meeting after that. Mm-hmm. And the second time around, after living on my own, I was just trying to find anywhere to live. I lived on couches. I lived in random houses, spent the night at friends' house sporadically, sometimes in my car. Pretty much all my belongings were just in my car for the most part. Eventually I did rent a room when I got a little bit older, a couple of different times. And, I had minimum wage paying job and just trying to go to high school. Fortunately, I went to a charter school, which was really small. It was 125 kids, K through 12. So I knew my teachers well, and they were kind of aware of my situation.
So you were trying to work and go to high school, work to survive and go, well, you were working. Yeah. You weren't trying, but I'm sure it felt like that at some point. But you were working to survive and still going to high school. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And just, yeah. From 15 on?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I, mentally, emotionally, physically, all of it, I was not doing well at all. Yeah. I felt hopeless. I felt in such a deep, dark pit. And I was just I just felt in such darkness. And, at that point I had turned to heavy drinking, heavy drug use, all sorts of drugs. I was living a very, very just difficult lifestyle and not taking care of myself at all, putting myself in really poor, dangerous situations. And yet I just was miserable and I wanted to escape, and I didn't even know how to get myself out of where I was. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to feel better. I wanted to feel cared for. And so that led me down to some really, really bad roads. And I'm really thankful that I feel like God kept me during that time. Even though there's so many times that I look back and I'm like, wow, I can't believe something worse did not happen. Mm-hmm. And yet the only thing I can say is that, God kept me through that time. Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like you had a relationship with God, or just looking back, you're like, he kept me? At the time.
There was never a point in my life where I felt like God wasn't real or didn't exist. Like, I always believed in God. And I also always believed that, like, meetings were the true church. I just believed, I was doing my own thing, rebelling, and that one day I was going to pull myself together and I was going to go back to meetings and, straighten myself out. But I was just in such survival mode that trying to.
But you had to be. I mean, at that age and trying to find a place to live and yeah.
So there's so much I could say about things that went on during that time, and even. I don't know if I want to say this or if I want to keep this or not, but there was even I don't even know how to describe it, but one of my teachers in high school abused me for a significant amount of time.
I'm sorry.
And that ended up in the court system for a long time, and that in itself was very traumatic on top of everything that was going on. So it just felt like I was getting beat down on every single side, and that I didn't have safe adults in my life, and I didn't have people that loved me well. And I just felt so lonely. I never blamed God that I can remember. I believed he was there. I just believed it was my own unwillingness or whatever you want to say that was keeping me from.
Well, that's what you were raised to think too.
Yeah.
Like it was your fault because you rebelled against the rules or whatever. So
very much.
Yeah.
I didn't. Hindsight is 20/20, and I look back on so much of my formative years, and I have a lot of compassion now for where I was and how much I struggled. At the time, I entirely blamed myself. I just thought everything was my fault. If I had just behaved better, if I had just followed the rules better, if I had just, I would be in a better situation. And yet I just felt like I'd been unable to, and I was just struggling.
Well, that's understandable. I mean, I've never been in a position like that, but I mean, I can understand how that would be overwhelming for sure.
Yeah.
What got you out of that stage in that? I don't know. I mean, maybe it wasn't instantly, but what happened next?
So, I mean, I knew that I was not in a good situation. I knew that the trajectory I was on was not good and that I wanted it to change. I just didn't know how to get out of where I was. It just seemed impossible to climb out of the pit that I was in. And so, but there was just something that came to me over and over again. It was like, if you don't stop what you're doing, you are going to end up dead. You're going to end up in jail. You're going to end up addicted to hard drugs. You're going to end up pregnant. Like there's like something is not going to go well if I keep this up. Like I have to make a change if I want to survive. And so I just felt like, I need to get out of this place and have a fresh start. And so...
What grade would have this been?
So that was probably when I was like 18.
Okay. So after high school?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm really fortunate that I graduated high school. I should not have, because I had too many absences to graduate, but my principal passed me. She was just had some compassion on me, and I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah. That would have been a feat in itself, it sounds like.
My twin brother had moved here to Washington, back up to Washington. He was professing, he still is, and he's always been like a very, very good boy. Like he has always done things well, never broken the rules. But we had a good relationship, and he was living here, and, I was talking to him one day on the phone about wanting to make a change, and he said, well, why don't you come move up here? So that's what I did. Probably about 6 months after that, I moved up. And I'm so glad that I was able to do that. I almost thought that wasn't going to happen. I had been drinking and driving and was pulled over shortly before I moved up here, and I thought, oh no, this is it. I'm going to jail and not. But I was fortunate that I got a lower conviction than I could have, and was able to still move up here. So I moved up here, and I knew that I wanted to better myself. I didn't really think that looked like going back to meetings at the time, but I just wanted to clean my life up. But I ended up coming to meetings. It was like convention time right when I moved up. So I didn't know anyone here. I didn't have a job. I was broke. So I went to convention with my brother, and I ended up just, loved the friends. They were very warm and welcoming, and I, was listening intently in meetings. And that first convention, I feel like God really spoke to me. And I felt like I experienced his light and his warmth, and I just felt like this is what I've been missing. Then I continued to go to meetings. I was asking lots of questions. I had a worker that I sat down and talked to at the next convention after that, and he was really helpful to me as I was sorting through so many questions and trying to process what was going on and how to move forward. We continued to have lots of conversations that were really helpful to me. And then I ended up, probably about 6 months after I moved here, I professed in gospel meeting. They actually tested the meeting towards the beginning of their mission, which was unusual.
Okay. Yeah.
In my mind, I had thought, okay, I'm going to profess, but I have almost a whole year before they're going to test the meeting. So I'm just going to sit back, get my life together a little bit more, and then I'll profess. But they tested the meeting very shortly towards the beginning of their mission. And so I just remember thinking in that moment, if I die tomorrow, I don't want to have not made my choice. And so,
because even everything you went through, and you had life experiences that a lot of professing people don't, you still had the mentality of this is the only way, and yeah, if I die tomorrow and I'm not professing, then there's no chance.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the mentality was still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was I feel like I was having this weird paradox of experiences where I felt like God was really speaking to me, and yet there is still so much fear behind my thinking and my mentality and what I believed. And so it was kind of this constant tug and pull of really feeling God's presence, and yet also feeling like I'm still failing so much, and feeling like my behavior is not good enough, and still that fear of hell, of, I have done too much, I've messed up too much, or I just can't get myself together enough.
So you had that fear of hell in you too. That was, for me, that was a big thing. I remember I was a little kid under one of these chairs, a kitchen chair, and I would just cry because I just, I was so scared of hell and that I would never be good enough. So you kind of had that same.
Yeah, no, that was very prevalent for me.
Yeah.
And I was mixed. I had so many mixed feelings. Part of me had so much joy that I was turning my life around, and that I had found a community, and that I felt so sure that this was God's true way, and I just felt so privileged that even though my upbringing was really messy, that I had still been born into God's true way. And how fortunate am I, out of all the people and places I could have been born, that I was born into God's family. I didn't have to try and find it. I was born into it. And so there was that, that mentality of just being so grateful for that, and joy in that, and joy in feeling like God was legitimately working with me and speaking to me, and yet also still this part of me where I was struggling with, still not being good enough, and still fearing hell, and still, what if I die before I've repented for who knows what?
I don't know if you can speak to this, but I'm going to ask you anyways. You mentioned that when you came back to meetings, you felt that community. And that's something that all humans want. We want community. We want fellowship.
Yeah.
And I use the term fellowship loosely there.
Right.
You had mentioned that you didn't really have a lot of friends when you were kind of an early teenager and stuff. But did you have some sense of community in I don't know if in the drug world or whatever? Was there a sense of community there? Or the drinking and smoking, or was there not?
There was some sense of community there, but it was really largely also like very dysfunctional people that were struggling. And so, not a lot of healthy friendships or relationships, but still, I would say still a sense of community.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because we can get involved in something to feel like we belong to something, right? Even though maybe it's not right.
Yeah.
So we can have a sense of belonging, and we have this innate desire to have that belonging, just as human nature. But I was just some thoughts processing in my head, just because when you felt that, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing to have fellowship and community, but there's more to that than I don't know. I'm not saying my thoughts at all, but anyways.
No, I think we're built for community, and we're built for relationship, and so we're always going to seek that out. And sometimes it looks like really unhealthy community, and sometimes healthy community.
But you felt like you found it again because it was familiar to you too.
Yeah, no, I felt like I found community again, and I felt like it was a lot healthier community. These were,
and from
stable,
the clean living standpoint, it was.
Right. Yeah. And, it's legitimate. I still have friends from when I first moved here that are still very dear to me. So, I think, there's lots of places that we find community. Yeah.
Okay, so you went back to meetings, and you were in your early adult years, 18, 19.
Yeah, I was 19 when I reprofessed.
Okay.
And
did they have any issues with you doing that, with having a tattoo, or did they not know that?
No, they didn't have any issues. They knew that my tattoos came from, my rebellious years of not going to meetings and not living at home. So, I was, I think, often lauded as like a prodigal. I'd gone out and had this wild time, and now I was coming
back in the fold.
And so, people were very happy and very supportive of that.
I can see that, yeah.
Yeah. After I reprofessed, I don't remember, maybe a year or two after that, I was baptized.
Had you been baptized before?
I had not.
Okay.
So this was the first time. I just felt like it was the next step, the next thing to do. I don't think I had a very good understanding of baptism, but I just felt like it was the right thing to do. And I was very serious about my walk with God. I was very serious about meetings. But our field at the time, for anyone interested in baptism, was given like a packet about baptism.
A little homework packet.
Yeah, something like that. And in that packet was like a checklist of behaviors, like worldly behaviors that you should not be engaging in if you were going to be baptized. And I can't even remember what was on the list, but I want to say things like going to the movies and wearing nail polish and drinking and I can't remember everything on there, but I was like, and the way it was talked about in the packet is that you are committing to never do any of these things again if you are baptized. And I was like deeply troubled by this, and I'm like, I don't know if I can say that I will never ever do any one of these things ever again. And so I was very distressed about this. Like, I really feel like I'm supposed to get baptized, and yet I don't feel 100% certain that I can adhere to all these things, like that I'm never going to do one of these things ever again. And so, yeah, I just had so much conflict over that.
Do you think that list was like your workers in that field specific, or was it like broader than that? Because I've never heard of having a list of
of requirements
of things. And I guess I should say there's a lot of things that happened. Well, you can't get baptized because you do these things.
Right.
But I've never heard of an actual list of like, hey, once you're baptized, you can't do this. So do you know if that was...
So I don't know how common that was. I have heard of other places where that has happened.
Okay.
So I don't know if this was something like pre-made or if it was something the workers in our field made at the time.
It doesn't matter. I was just curious. Yeah.
I went and talked to the same worker that I had talked to previously when I had, first started coming back to meetings, and just, brought this packet to him, and he was very clear with me that this is not what baptism is about. Like, this is not right. This is, getting baptized isn't about adhering to a list of rules and things you can and cannot do. And like, if you feel like the Lord is moving you to take this step, like that's what you listen to. And so that really settled me a lot. So I ended up getting baptized after that. I continued going to meetings faithfully. Then I met my husband at convention in Idaho. We dated for 6 weeks, and then we got engaged, and then we got married the following summer. I think we both knew pretty much right away, like, this is my spouse, like, this is who God has for me. So we got married. We had our 2 sons, and I'd always had some questions and some concerns, and not everything that I agreed with about meetings. I felt like the apparel was like very much tradition, but I just kind of shrugged it off. I'm like, I know this isn't like a requirement, but it's tradition, and it's fine. Like, everybody has their faults, or and so I brushed some of those things off. I had a really hard time with not being able to like accept other Christians as Christians, and also this like big like thing, like this just concern of like needing to bring people to meetings, and yet like also having to try to explain away some of the things. But like, I think for a while I really bought into like, if they're truly seeking, they'll see that this is God's true way.
From your life experience, had you met other Christians during any of that journey? Not
a lot, but probably in my like early 20s, I had some Christian coworkers. So I was, kind of introduced to some Christians then. I dated a little bit outside of meetings, which is for sure a no-no. But I would always like bring them to meeting. And eventually, like, when that didn't work out, I eventually felt very like compelled that I was absolutely to marry a professing man. But yeah.
Did you feel like it would get you more points? Like,
I didn't really feel like it would get me more points or like more status or whatever, but I just felt like this is what this is the right thing to do.
Okay.
And so, anyways, yeah, I felt very strongly about that. And then when I met Derek, it was just like, I just felt right away like this is my husband. And so we got married, had our 2 kids. Again, like I was having some thoughts. Back to like the whole one true way doctrine, I started, that became a more prevalent thing in my mind that I was more and more bothered by as time went by. And my husband had several Christian coworkers that we got to know and became friends with.
Okay.
And I was just so impressed and inspired by their lives, their testimonies, the fruit that was in their lives. And I was like, well, there's absolutely no denying that the Lord is with them and that they love the Lord and they're serving God.
How many years ago would have this been?
That probably would have been, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago.
Okay.
And I would say I actually kind of like accepted other Christians. Like I didn't really believe they were like going to hell, but also I believe like, oh, eventually they're gonna come to our way. Eventually they're gonna see that this is like the most scriptural. And
we had the most truth.
Yes,
like,
we were the most right out of all the churches and all the Christians out there. We for sure had it the most right. And so, but those Christians, none of them were like drawn to the way. And so this is a little confusing for me. And yet I just couldn't deny what was in their lives.
Did they ask about your beliefs when you became friends?
A little bit, yeah. We would talk about it, but we didn't go too much into like our church or anything. So I think we all just like accepted each other as Christians and they didn't know a lot of backstory about the church we went to. And so, yeah, we were just good friends. But I also had started to become really bothered by calling meetings the truth or the way. I was like, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And that's not a title that we should be taking on. Like that belongs to Jesus. And so I was feeling really strongly about that. And I just had this like burning thing deep within me that was like, I want to know what God's truth is. I had been too scared to like question anything before, but
we're taught not to, so yeah.
Eventually it became something that I could not ignore. And so I just said, I am going to study the Bible with fresh eyes. I'm going to set aside all my preconceived notions about what the Bible says, what God says, what the truth is. Just read it with as fresh eyes as possible. And I just like begged God that whole time, just please show me your truth. Whatever it is, I just want to know what your truth is. And so
this would have been about 2020 or 2021, somewhere in there?
Probably about, oh goodness. Yeah, somewhere in there, 2021.
We'll just say pre-Dean Brewer.
Yes, definitely pre-Dean.
Okay.
I started studying the Bible that way, and it became alive like I had never experienced in my life. I mean, I couldn't even believe it. And I was reading my Bible for, hours a day, every day. Like every chance that I could get, I was consuming my Bible like never before. And I was just like, it's just like my jaw was dropping all over the place because I was like, it was scripture that I was very familiar with. And yet I was like understanding it in a way that I never had before. And I over and over again was just like, how did I miss this? How did I never see this? How did I not understand this? And it was just like scales falling from my eyes. And it was incredible, I look back on that time and it was so rich and so special, and yet also so scary and so terrifying.
Well, it is terrifying when you pray to God that He'll show you the truth and that you're ready for it.
Yeah.
Because if we pray that, I guess I'm not sure how you would pray, but if you pray and you're not ready for it, if you're not sincere in your request to know the truth, then you probably won't. I mean, it could happen, but once you're ready to lay it all on the table and ask God what's true, you better hang on.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I felt like just totally wide open, like whatever it is, I just want to know your truth. Yeah, like I said, I feel like God definitely answered that prayer mightily, and yet that came with so many conflicting feelings because I just started more and more struggling with like, well, where does this leave me? And like, can I stay in meetings? And like, I had a really hard time reconciling my beliefs about what the Bible said versus what was taught in meetings. And yet I loved meetings. I loved the friends. And
where was your husband in this? Like, did you have conversations with him, or was this kind of...
I had started talking to him about like what I was discovering in the Bible and like just my thought process on everything. And so then he started really digging too.
Okay.
We were having lots of conversations and both studying our Bible a lot. I still really struggled with fear. I struggled, what if I have this all wrong? What if I'm misinterpreting the Bible? What if I'm being deceived? What if, so many things that I just feared. And I felt like, I even prayed to God. I remember just driving down the road one day sobbing and just like, God, like, take us off the earth right now if we are going down a dangerous road. Like, if we're going down a road that's going to lead us to hell, like, just take us away now while we can still be saved. So many days I just spent sobbing, praying, reading, literally on the floor on my face, just pleading with God, like, please don't let me be deceived. Please, like, show me what's true and what's right. And I feel like he just kept speaking to me really powerfully. And
mostly through reading, right?
Mostly through reading, yeah. I was having some conversations with some different people. I had some conversations with some people who had previously left meetings, but I was also having some conversations with some workers. I had one in particular, the one that I had spent a lot of time talking with before. I was asking him lots of questions about everything that I was discovering in scripture.
It sounded like he gave you pretty sound advice up until this part of the story. So what was his response to that?
I think that he understood some of my concerns and even probably shared some of those concerns over doctrine.
Is he still in the work now?
Yes.
Okay.
And yet, I think, I don't want to speak for him, but I feel like he's been very clear that this is where he feels he's been called, and he wants to honor that. And two, I think he still believes that like the way the ministry is set up is correct, the most right. That this is what Jesus instructed. You say
the most right. That has come up in conversations that I've had with people that still go to meetings, and then some that have left, but they're like, but I feel like the way we met was the most right, the most biblical. It's just frustrating because if you really dig into it, you start to understand. But that's a very common phrase used. Well, this seems like the most biblical, but what we have to remember is that we've been taught our entire life that this is the most biblical.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that I guess you're saying It's not that he said that necessarily, but that's how he feels.
I think that's his belief. And
which is a common belief.
Yeah, it is very common. And that was my belief at one point too. You know, for a while I really struggled with, you know, I was like, well, even if this is the most right or the most scriptural, where in the Bible does it point to like our obedience? Like if you have a certain level of obedience that's better than everyone else's, like how does that make you the most right and others false? Like I couldn't find any evidence of just, that your superior perceived obedience makes you right and everybody else wrong. And so I struggled with that, but it was actually really surprising to me when I had started studying the Bible with fresh eyes. The one thing that I had felt pretty solid on was like the ministry. Like that's right. There's lots of other things that I'm questioning. The ministry was not really something I questioned. And yet the ministry was the first thing that jumped out at me as I was studying. And I'm like, wait a minute. I don't think we're doing things as correctly as we think. And that really took me by surprise because I thought the form of the ministry was like pretty spot on. And yet the more I studied, the more I was like, wait, this isn't matching up at all. And you just have to do bigger and bigger mental gymnastics to try and get it to fit. It's like, you know, putting a square peg in a round hole.
Well, and like you said, though, at this point, you took the lenses off as much as you could anyways and tried to allow God to show it. It's not that it's a special revelation or something, but just to show the Bible in a new light, right?
Right.
That's exactly what it is. You're taking the lenses off.
Yeah.
And so you could see.
And I wanted to read it as if I was someone off the street that had never picked up a Bible before, had no knowledge of anything, and just going, God, what are you trying to tell us?
Did you get a new Bible?
I actually started using my phone
and so that's good
using the different translations on there, because I also like felt very rebellious veering away from King James or even New King James. That was not something I'd really done much, and yet I actually had a professing friend that suggested I try like another version, and again I felt like I was a little nervous to do that. But I was amazed at how great it was.
It's crazy how, and King James only is a pretty, I don't know if I'd call it big, but it's a thing outside of 2
very
by 2s,
much,
right?
yeah.
So like, I have some really close friends that are King James only, and so I don't want to offend them, but I put them in the category of a cult almost also, because, well, we don't need to go down that road because that's not what this is about, but but I do remember a worker from a different state at convention sometime using like the NIV as like and this translation says this.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really cool. And so I think that varied a bit throughout, but yeah, for sure is very common to be King James.
Very common. And like you said, once in a while you'd hear a worker say, and I like how it's said in another translation, and you know. Well,
and I guess the point of you being scared to read another translation, what I was going to say is that just shows how much ingrained we were that was the right translation too.
Yeah. And then once I started reading in different translations, I was, I felt silly. I was like, how could I thought that God was not going to like honor this or speak to me as much through this or whatever. I was like, I'm getting so much more than when I was reading out of King James. And yet, for so long it had been, like you said, deeply ingrained that King James.
And there's nothing wrong with King James.
No.
It's a good translation. But and again, there's lots of videos on that, so you can do your own research. But
no, just for my own comprehension, it was really healthy for me to read other versions, and I'm a huge proponent of reading lots of different versions.
Well, and like you said, if you do it online through an app, you have access to all of them.
I have like
and
5 versions that I use regularly that I rotate through.
Yeah, that's what I do too. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, back to how the worker responded. He did he didn't answer a lot of my questions directly. You know, I think one of the prevailing things that you see among those who maybe have a little bit more of an understanding of sound doctrine but still go to meetings is that they'll maybe say things like, oh, you're just looking at man's weakness, or like there's issues in all churches, or, you know, the early church struggled with lots of these issues, and, you know, this is just man's weakness or human nature or whatever that
and
these
it's not our
issues
place
are
to judge,
occurring.
Yeah, and it's not our place to judge that, what they say.
Yeah. So it's just like I was kind of the bad guy for bringing these issues up, because really, like, I'm just focusing on, you know, man's issues, like, instead of just looking at the good and focusing on the good. And so I was just really, really conflicted for many, many, many months. But, you know, I was just praying desperately that God would reveal, like, what we were supposed to do, where we were supposed to go. And I was just in so much turmoil at the thought of leaving. It was a lot of fear, like I said before, mixed with just sorrow of potentially leaving this community, people that I love so dearly, and also like how it would affect our family and our friends. I knew they'd be very, very upset. And so,
I can relate 100%. And and most of the viewers will be able to too.
Right.
For sure.
So that, I mean,
because I think that is the hardest. I could be wrong, but I think that is the hardest thing to swallow, is knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But having to make the choice anyways.
It was, I mean, it made me like physically sick to my stomach to think about leaving and having to tell people. And I just, you know, and I also felt like I was potentially walking into such an unknown abyss. Like, where do I go? What do I do? Like, this is my entire community. This is my church. And it's, you know, it's not just a church. It's like your whole way of life revolves around this community and this culture and all that entails. And so I was so scared, you know, just feeling like I don't know where I'm going to land. And yet I just felt like, you know, by faith I must obey. And so eventually, you know, I was praying a ton. I was, you know, like laying the fleece out and you know, asking God lots of different things and wanting signs, wanting and you know, he was very good during that time, and has continued to be. But you know, it just felt like the doors kept closing for meetings, for us staying there, and other doors were opening.
Yeah, sometimes God shuts doors just as much as he opens them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because we always think, well, you know, if there's a door open, then that's the answer. But sometimes it's a door closed is the answer. And then you have to wait still for something. But yeah.
And I felt like I was kind of pushing on doors on both sides a little bit, like kind of trying to push doors on meetings, trying to push doors outside of meetings, and just like see what happened and where we were supposed to go, what we were supposed to do. And you know, me and Derek were talking about it a lot and praying together, and he was feeling even more unsettled about what to do than I was. And you can share whatever you want, but how, as far as him growing up, he pretty traditional, professing family? Sort of. His parents and family is definitely was not as traditional and strict as my family. So his upbringing definitely looked different than mine.
So it maybe wasn't quite as scary for him.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's the right word.
Yeah, no, I agree. He definitely did not have the fear that I was struggling with. His more was just like attachment to like family, like his
life.
His whole family. You know, we went to Sunday morning meeting with his parents and Bible study with his sister, and you know, like it's such a family thing too that was really hard, really hard to like.
Well, and we come back to that community that we talked about earlier. You know, it's good to have community. I'm not trying to bash it at all. It maybe sounds like that. But that's what makes it so hard, is because when you do everything with, I mean, nearly every waking hour besides going to work or school, you know, get-togethers and convention and meetings and everything with that community, by design or not, it's extremely hard to leave that because that's all you've ever known.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also really struggled with like, there were so many people that I loved and respected in meetings that I felt like were so much smarter and so much more spiritual and so much all these other things. And I'm like, how could I possibly know something different or more correct than they do?
Why did God pick me?
Yeah, I just felt like surely like I don't know better than these people. Like they're like, who am I to think that I, you know something more or different. And so that really messed with my mind a lot too, because I'm like, there's so many like deeply spiritual, incredibly well-read, well-versed, you know, so committed professing people, and yet I was just this young like little nobody. And so yeah, that definitely messed with my mind, and I had to, you know, ultimately like what really calmed that was just like I went back to over and over again where Jesus is like, my sheep know my voice and they follow me. And I was just like, I know the voice of my Savior, and I have to trust that.
Amen.
And let go of all the other voices. And so I just came back to that over and over again, and I just came back to God's like simple truths over and over again. Like, God will not forsake those who seek him, and he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. And, you know, my sheep know my voice. And I would just like repeat these things to myself over and over again and just say, this is what I believe. This is what I have to trust. And the voice of fear is not from God. And so, yeah, that's what I came back to. And I feel like as time went on, that voice became the more powerful voice in my heart and mind than the voice of fear. And so I was kind of double dipping churches for a little bit. Like, I would go to a 9 o'clock service somewhere in town and then come home and go to meeting with my family at 10:30. Just because I kind of wanted to see what was out there. So I visited several different local churches. And I had felt very strongly that like I wanted a church to go to, and I wanted it to be somewhere that I felt like the Lord led us to. So I was visiting different churches, and then I was with some of my Christian friends, and met another friend, and she said, like, why don't you come to our church on Sunday? And so she said, or at least just listen to a sermon online. So I went and listened to it. It is nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I went and listened to a sermon online like that night or maybe the next morning, and he was actually like speaking about he was actually speaking out of John. I want to say John 3, but then referencing the story in Numbers about the brass serpent on the pole. And I had just been studying that in Numbers, and so that like really like got my attention. And so I was like, you know, I want to go. I want to check this church out. And so I went, and it was really wonderful. The sermon was really good, and it also had a less intimidating atmosphere than some of the other churches I had visited. It was really small. It was in a rented building. The music was really low key. It was just like a piano and a violin. It was just really simple, low key, and I found that really comforting.
Well, it's what you were used to.
It's what I was used to, and also at this time, like, there is nobody leaving meetings. There was nobody having the discussions that are happening now, and so I just was kind of going in blind to this whole world of Christianity outside of meetings, and it was scary. It was overwhelming. It was intimidating, and so I just really liked the environment there. And then afterwards, I had obviously just met the pastor and his wife right before church, and afterwards he asked, like, can I pray for you? And, he meant like right there with me, which was a foreign concept for me. And I said, yeah. And he's like, well, what can I like pray for you for? And I was just like, well, I don't know what to ask. I've never had anybody like pray out loud for me for something specific. So I was just like totally drawing a blank. He's like, okay, well, I'll just pray for you if that's okay. And so him and his wife put their hands on my arms and prayed for me, and like that is such a profound moment in my journey, because not only just the power of being prayed for like that, but also like the words that they prayed were like exactly what was going on in my heart and mind. Like, they were articulating what was going on inside my head better than I could, and yet they didn't know me at all.
Yeah.
They didn't know my story. They didn't know anything. And so I was just like in absolute awe. Like I just like cried through the whole thing.
I remember the first time somebody prayed for me by name. It's powerful. It's amazing. Yeah. Because it's so, I guess what we would have called religious or worldly,
right?
Which is crazy to think about.
I know.
But it was so different than what we were ever accustomed to. But it's so powerful.
It's so powerful. And just like, especially in that moment where he was able to say things, like, it just felt like that was from God. Like, there's no way he could have prayed a prayer like that. And so
it was,
it just like, I immediately was like, this is home. Like, this is home. And so, of course I went home and told my husband about it. And
did you go to meeting that day?
So that was actually union meeting. So no, I did not go that day. And I told my husband about it, and so then he went maybe the next Sunday or sometime shortly after that, and he went by himself, or I can't remember what happened, but anyways, he went. I wasn't there with him, but I remember him coming home and being like, I felt more fed there than I have felt fed in meetings in a very long time. And so we were both just like, felt like this was where we belonged. And so I had also been praying. It was also around the time when like the new workers list was coming out for the, who would be assigned to what fields. And that was something that I had been praying about. Well, maybe if this, or this worker is in our field, then we'll stay. Like, but when, like the day after Derek had gone to church, the list came out, and it was none of the workers that I like had prayed about. And again, it just felt like another confirmation of like, okay, the store is closing, the store is opening. And so, and we'd also at some point between there, sat down and talked, me and Derek sat down and talked with the pastor and his wife. We just had lots of questions to ask them. So yeah, we asked lots of questions, and it was, a really, really good visit, really good experience. And, at that point, like, we'd kind of told some of our Christian friends, like, what was going on and more of the background. And they were pretty shocked to, like, learn more about our background and our church. So they were, like, kind of walking alongside us, answering questions, praying with us. And one thing that I was really grateful for was that none of them, like, not those friends, not the pastor and his wife, even though they knew our background and the kind of the church we're coming from, none of them, like, told us what to do. They were not like, you need to run, you need to get out of there. The answer time and time again was, you just need to obey the Lord. Like, just go where the Lord is leading you, wherever that is. And so that also was really helpful for me, because I had been a little leery, and I was like, I did not want to feel like I was being pulled or influenced or manipulated in any way. I just felt so strongly that, like, this needs to come from the Lord. I don't want to be influenced by anything or anyone else. Like, so I was really grateful that time and time again, our friends, our Christian friends, just said, just listen to the Lord.
They just came alongside you and supported you.
They just came alongside us and supported us. And so that was really helpful. And so we ended up writing a letter. We sent it to, like, our Wednesday and Sunday elders, as well as a handful of workers, some close friends and some close family, and just try to be as gracious as possible. And just, we didn't go into any details much about doctrine outside of just saying, there's some things that we have concerns about, like, and ultimately we've come to believe that only Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and that we are saved by God's grace through faith in Jesus Christ, and just some really basic things. But we love you all. We're thankful for the friends you've been and the roles you've played in our spiritual journey, and we hope to continue in those relationships. We also had a few in-person conversations with some of our family as well, talking to them about leaving meetings. And, we had a lot of really, really upset people. Angry.
Well, you were the prodigal daughter that came back. And...
So it didn't, that was really hard. I knew that there would be lashback, on all ends of all types, like anger, sadness. I don't think I was quite prepared for the severity of it, because it was a lot. And we had a lot of really, really, really difficult conversations that did not go very well.
And for the viewers, this was all before it was more normal
before
to
it was
leave,
typical
right?
to leave. Yeah. So we had some pretty extreme reactions from people. And I was devastated. I just remember that week that we left, just sobbing and just even wondering, like, did we make a mistake? And Derek really, like, helped me through that a lot. He was really solid and really steady during that time. And he's like, no, this is where the Lord is leading us. Like, this is what we're supposed to be doing. So that was huge and very, very helpful for me. And I just kept going back to, like, I know my shepherd's voice. And, that kept me. And then the further you move forward, the more you can gain perspective. And as that happens, you're able to, like, kind of separate yourself from some of the intense emotion and see things a little bit more clearly. I think when you're in it and you're so close to it, like, it's hard to see clearly. Things are so muddled. there's such strong emotions, so many questions, but as you continue moving forward and probably have some perspective away from meetings, things just became more and more clear and more settled. And, we've continued to attend the same church for the last couple of years since we left meetings, and have had incredible experiences there, and just community fellowship. I also have done BSF, Bible Study Fellowship. This will be my 3rd year doing it. And then been involved with, even teaching some at our church, like just in the women's Bible study. And I've also been pretty heavily involved since the Dean Brewer crisis I have been a part of the advocacy team for the Pacific Northwest region. Okay. So that started out as like pretty much all professing people, friends and workers, and they allowed me on the team. So I joined that, and now it's a little more, there's more of a mix. Quite a few people on the team have left meetings since then, but yeah, it's more of a mix now. So I was and am involved with that. And then I was also heavily involved with Concerned and Connected Friends, Connected and Concerned Friends, and have had an admin role on there. So I, in the last, over a year now, I unexpectedly was kind of thrown back into the meeting world, and have had a lot of contact with friends and workers, people still in, people leaving, people that have left, just all across the board. I felt really strongly that I wanted to be available for people and like walk alongside people. I just know how meaningful and helpful it was to have so many people walk alongside me, and that continue to do so. And
even outside meetings, but you had people.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why, that's why I'm doing this, is because there's so many people that can relate with you if you're going through some of these questions and things.
Yeah.
But we're the people that have gone through it are the only people who can relate.
Yeah.
Right? So if everybody just that left falls off the face of the earth, then everybody goes through the same thing. But we can come together and encourage and share stories and visit and have fellowship, and we can, like, the words mean the same thing.
Yeah.
Because that's what we grew up with. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing I felt really convicted about when I left meetings was that I needed to stay connected and just warm towards the friends as much as possible. I mean, there's some relationships that have ended or dropped off where that hasn't been possible to maintain. But I just really felt like I want to stay connected. I need to stay connected. I need to, I've just felt really passionate about trying to bridge that gap between those outside and those inside. And
well, it's our people, right?
Yeah.
The verse that for me was when, and I've mentioned this a few times, so this isn't new, but was when Jesus is when he healed the man we know as Legion, right? He was in the graveyard, and he was chained by the fellow villagers to try to contain him. And he says, well, I want to come with you. And Jesus says, no, go back to your people and tell them what the Lord has done for you. And that's been, obviously that wasn't he wasn't talking to me, but I can relate to that, right? Go and tell your people what God has done, what I've done for you.
Yeah.
And so I think it is a calling for us who have left to go back, and that is our mission field, right?
Yeah.
Of being able to talk to people and encourage and relate with them. Yeah.
No, I completely agree with that. And it's, there's moments where I've struggled, moments where I've seen so much of the harm. I mean, just my own harm, but also seen so much harm that comes from the doctrine and that comes from like the rampant abuse that has gone on, and where it's been harder to just have a lot of grace and a lot of patience, and because you just see like, like so much pain and confusion and fear and harm that has happened and continues to happen. And I just want people to understand, so there's times where I have not had as much grace as I would like to have.
Well, and time helps with that. And so, you've been out a few years now, so you can probably contest to that we can have a little bit more patience. But you go through the grief process. So you can, and everybody does that differently, but you can be angry, you can be, sad and depressed,
exactly.
and all those things.
I've continued to have grief, since leaving. It's not been a totally linear thing, and especially with everything that's gone on in the past year, I have had so much grief, and just even heartache over, the way some relationships have changed and shifted, and just like, just a desire to be able to just walk side by side with fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, like without these church lines and these boundaries and these judgments and like so many things that I feel like just get in the way of really like what God wants of us. Like if you look at the first two commandments, love God, love others, to put it really succinctly. And I feel like everything that we are doing, thinking, whatever, our whole being, like, should be helping us to do either of those things. And if we're not, like, we're kind of missing the point. And so I come back to that often if I start to feel like too upset or too whatever, like how can I just walk alongside and love my fellow brother or sister well? There's a couple quotes that our pastor says a lot that have also been a huge help to me and have come back to me over and over again. And if you're like a close friend of mine, you've probably heard me say it multiple times. But that we're not called to be lawyers, we're called to be witnesses. And that's something that has been really helpful for me, because I can get a little, I feel like sometimes I just really want to like lay it down and be like, well, this is how it is, and like really try and explain things. And not that there's not a time and place to have discussions. I mean, I've certainly had many, but just like what really speaks to people is when we are witnessing well, like who the Lord is and what he has done in our lives. The other one is that if someone can talk you into it, someone else can talk you out of it. And so like, I just feel it's so important that it's the Lord that we're listening to and that anyone else is listening to. Like, we can try and convince people of a lot of things, but really it comes from the Lord. And there's things that we might say that are helpful or whatnot, but it's just important that we trust the Lord and his working and allow him to reveal things to people.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, I say this often, but there's nothing we can do or say to anybody, and we know that better than anybody because we've been in that position, right? So we've probably, at least for myself, my wife would try to tell me things, and I was just like, you just wouldn't have it. It was a brick wall, right? And so we know that it does have to come from God, and we can plant seeds. We should plant lots of seeds.
Yeah.
But God does the growth. And so,
absolutely. Yeah.
So you've given a number of good advice already, but is there one specific piece of advice you would give to somebody who still goes to meetings?
Oh, that's a big question. You know, I think it's just really trusting God, trusting that He is working with you, He is speaking to you, and just also kind of coming to understand the magnitude of His grace. And I don't think any of us can fully understand that, but when we begin to really get a glimpse of how great God's grace is, that changes everything for us. So if you can really study that, ask God to help you to understand His grace, it's absolutely life-changing. And there is so much joy and so much hope when we really get a good picture of that.
For sure. Yeah, that's good advice. Well, I didn't hear your kids at all, so
Yeah,
they did really
they did good.
I guess maybe Derek's taking care of them all.
Yes.
But I do appreciate your time. I'm sure some of the memories maybe aren't the most pleasant to remember or to think about and to remember, but all of us have a unique journey. And also I appreciate you. You know, people think that I am on all the groups and know everything that goes on, which isn't as far from the truth. But I appreciate, from what you said, being available for others and being in those groups. And I'm in a couple of them. And it's so, I mean, we're raised that those are such a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Don't go on the internet and read anything about the 2x2s or about the truth or whatever. But I'm glad that there's people that are on there to encourage. And if you're watching this and you still go to meetings, your eyes will be opened, because, you know, a lot of these groups just lay it all out there, you know, and there's a lot of things that you maybe don't know, but then the main thing is there's this community of believers out there. There's communities of non-believers too, but there is communities of believers out there that are here to come beside you and help you work through things.
Yeah, and it may feel scary if you've never been on any of them, but I think another thing is just trusting that the Lord will give you discernment, to sort through things.
The truth is not afraid of itself.
Exactly.
And if you can realize that, like, if you know, and that's one of the things that's most frustrating for me is when people don't even, like, they're so closed that they can't, I don't know, they're so I suppose they're afraid in some way that it will change their theology, and it probably will, right? But if you're so sure that you have the truth and that meetings is the only way, what does it hurt to
the truth can stand up to scrutiny. It can stand up to questioning. And, you know, when I went through my process of, like, studying the Bible with fresh eyes, you know, obviously there is some part of me that was fearful, but I also felt like if this is the truth, I'm going to find that out. Yeah. And I'm also going to be able to defend it really, really well.
Yeah. And sometimes that's when you find out.
I ended up not being able to defend it near as much as I thought I could.
That was the same thing for me, because I was challenged. So my wife challenged me. Oh, this is what you believe, and so I was like, let me show you. Yeah. And that's when you actually study, you're like, oh, whoa, that's not. Yeah. So, well, again, I appreciate your time. And is it okay for people to reach out to you? You can put your email in the comment or in the description, and if they want to reach out to you. And but
I'd be happy to visit with anybody.
Okay, sounds great.
Thanks.